Class, this is what we call pathological lying. Mrs. Smith's voice cuts through the classroom as she holds David's trifled poster high. David, do you honestly expect us to believe this? There are only 9 4-star generals in the entire US military. She tears the poster down the middle, once, twice, the photo of the decorated soldier splitting apart. The pieces flutter to the linoleum like confetti. I can call him right now, Mrs. Smith. David's voice doesn't waver. He's at the Pentagon this week. I have his direct number. Enough, she lets the torn pieces fall at his feet. This is disrespectful. This is stolen valor. You're claiming someone else's achievements. I've taught for 15 years, David. I know when a student fabricates stories for attention. Her eyes narrow. People from neighborhoods like yours don't just rise to 4-star general. 28 third graders hold their breath. A few exchange knowing glances, most stare at their desks. David kneels slowly, gathering the pieces of his father's face from the floor. Have you ever had your truth dismissed, because someone decided who you could be before you even spoke? 2 weeks earlier, David had spread the poster board across the kitchen table, his small hands smoothing out every crease. The trifold was pristine white, waiting to tell a story his classmates wouldn't believe even when they saw it. Mom, should I use the photo from the ceremony or the one from his office? He held up 2 pictures, studying them with the seriousness of a jeweler examining diamonds. Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she was finishing her nursing shift notes. Even after a 12-hour day at the hospital, she smiled. Which one makes you most proud? David didn't hesitate. He chose the ceremony photo, his father in full dress uniform, 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder, standing before the American flag. The weight of every medal told a story. The Bronze Star from Iraq, the Distinguished Service Medal. The pride in his father's eyes that day had made David's chest feel too small to contain everything he felt. That's the one, Sarah said softly. That's your daddy. They worked together every evening that week. Sarah helped him print the timeline on card stock: Detroit 1975, West Point 1997, Iraq 2004, Afghanistan 2008, the Pentagon 2023. David traced each date with a ruler, his lines perfectly straight. His 3rd grade teacher had always praised his attention to detail back before Mrs. Smith transferred in. Tell me again about the stars, David said on the 5th night, carefully gluing down a paragraph he'd rewritten 3 times. 4 stars means he's one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire military, Sarah explained, the way she had 100 times before. It means decades of service. It means sacrifice. It means he missed my birthday 4 times, David added, not unkindly, just factually. Yes, baby, it means that too. David added a section titled, What Makes a Hero? He wrote about leadership, about serving something bigger than yourself, about the time his father helped rebuild a school in Kandahar. He wrote about sacrifice in words that shouldn't come from an 8-year-old, but did. The night before the presentation, Sarah found David asleep at the table, his cheek pressed against the finished poster. The photo of his father stood guard over him, those 4 stars catching the kitchen light. She didn't wake him. She just draped a blanket over his shoulders and kissed his forehead, wondering, not for the first time, why her brilliant boy always had to work twice as hard to be believed half as much. The poster was perfect. David had made sure of that. He thought perfection would be enough. The warning signs had been there for months, small cuts that bled slowly enough that David had learned to ignore them. It started with his shoes. David, those are expensive sneakers. Mrs. Smith had said it in October, her voice carrying that particular tone, the one that sounded like a question but was really an accusation. Where did those come from? My dad sent them for my birthday, Mrs. Smith. Your dad, she'd paused, tapping her pen against her grade book. The one who's never at parent-teacher conferences. He's deployed, ma'am, he's serving overseas. The other kids had shifted in their seats. Maya Chen had looked down at her own designer sneakers, the ones nobody ever questioned. Then came the writing. David had turned in his essay about the Lincoln Memorial in November, proud of the way he'd woven in facts about the Gettysburg Address and the Civil Rights Movement. He'd used words like enduring and reconciliation because his father used them in their video calls, and David liked how they sounded. Mrs. Smith had kept him after class. David, did your mother write this for you? She held the paper between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. No, ma'am, I wrote it myself. This vocabulary is unusually advanced for a third grader from, she stopped herself, but David filled in the blank she'd left hanging. From your neighborhood, from your apartment complex, from your kind of family. I read a lot, he'd said simply. I'm sure you do. She'd marked him down 2-letter grades for inconsistent voice and moved on. In December, she'd questioned his science fair project on renewable energy. Did you really build this solar panel model yourself, or did you have help from an adult? I watched YouTube tutorials, Mrs. Smith, and my mom helped me with the soldering iron because I'm not allowed to use it alone. That sound. That constant, dismissive sound that said I don't believe you without using the words. By January, David had learned to make himself smaller. He'd started using simpler vocabulary in his essays. He'd stopped raising his hand when he knew the answers to the hard questions. He'd worn his old shoes, the ones with the sole peeling away from the toe. His mother had noticed. Baby, why aren't you wearing the sneakers Daddy sent? They're too nice for school, he'd said, and Sarah's jaw had tightened in that way that meant she was holding back fury. But David had hoped that the hero project would be different. Everyone brought in photos of their parents. Everyone talked about what made their families special. He'd thought the poster would speak for itself. He'd thought the truth would be obvious. He'd thought wrong. David's hands didn't shake when he stood in front of the class. He'd practiced this presentation 17 times in the mirror, timing each section, perfecting the part where he'd explain what 4 stars meant. The poster stood on the easel beside him, his father's face watching over him like always. My hero is my father, General Robert Washington, David began, his voice clear and steady. He's a 4-star general in the United States Army, which means... Wait, hold on. Mrs. Smith's voice sliced through his introduction. She stood from her desk, arms crossed. Did you say 4-star general? Yes, ma'am, he currently serves at the Pentagon as... Class, how many 4-star generals do we think there are in America? She surveyed the room like a prosecutor addressing a jury. Silence. David, she turned to him, eyebrows raised. Do you know? He knew this was a trap, but truth was truth. 9, Mrs. Smith. There are 9 active 4-star generals right now. 9, she repeated it slowly, walking toward his poster. In the entire country, and you're telling us your father is one of them. Tyler Johnson snickered from the back row. David saw Maya elbow him, but the damage was done. A ripple of stifled laughter spread through the classroom like spilled water. Yes, ma'am, he was promoted last year after. David, Mrs. Smith picked up the poster, holding it at arm's length. I need you to be honest with the class. Did you take this photo from the internet? Is this some stock photo you printed out? No, ma'am, that's my dad. That's from his promotion ceremony at the Pentagon. My mom and I were there. Maury whispers now. David heard fragments. No way, and he's lying, and my dad says people make up stuff for attention. Continue, Mrs. Smith said, but her tone made it clear she'd already rendered her verdict. David tried. He really did. He explained about West Point, about the deployments, about the schools his father had helped rebuild. But every fact sounded more impossible in the thick atmosphere of disbelief. His classmates weren't listening anymore. They were watching Mrs. Smith's face, reading her skepticism like a permission slip to doubt him. When he mentioned the Bronze Star, Tyler laughed out loud. When he talked about his father's work at the Pentagon, someone whispered, "Yeah, right." When he said his father had advised the president, Mrs. Smith actually scoffed. David finished his presentation in a room that had already decided he was a liar. The applause was thin, obligatory, the kind you give someone you pity. Well, Mrs. Smith said, walking toward him with deliberate slowness, that was quite a story, David. She reached for his poster. And that's when everything shattered. Principal Graves' office smelled like old coffee and disappointment. David sat in the chair across from the desk, the torn pieces of his poster clutched in his lap like broken wings. Mrs. Smith stood beside the principal, arms still crossed, her face arranged in an expression of concerned righteousness. David, we need to talk about honesty. Principal Graves folded his hands on the desk, large hands, the kind meant to look fatherly but felt like a gavel coming down. Mrs. Smith has brought some serious concerns to my attention. I didn't lie, sir, that's really my father. Son, I've pulled your file. Graves tapped a manila folder with one finger. You're on free lunch. Your mother works as a nurse at County General, night shift, correct? David's stomach dropped. Yes, sir, but... You live in the Riverside Apartments on 3rd Street, Unit. Yes, sir, David's voice came out smaller now. Now, David, Grav leaned forward, his voice dropping into that tone adults used when they thought they were being kind. I need you to understand something. 4-star generals make considerable salaries, they live in certain kinds of neighborhoods, they send their children to certain kinds of schools. My dad sends money, David said quickly. But Mom puts most of it in my college fund. She says she can handle our bills herself because she's proud. I'm sure she is. Grav cut him off gently like pruning a plant. But pride sometimes makes us tell stories that aren't quite true, doesn't it? Makes us want to be more than we are. Mrs. Smith nodded, her expression softening into something worse than anger, pity. My father is General Robert Washington, David repeated, each word precise and deliberate. He graduated from West Point in 1997. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has a Bronze Star and a Distinguished Service Medal. I can prove all of this. David, if your father was really a 4-star general, why would you qualify for free lunch? Grav spread his hands as if the logic was irrefutable. Why would your mother work night shifts? Why would you live in a 2-bedroom apartment? Because my mom wants to be independent, because she didn't want to move every time Dad got transferred. Because this is a fantasy, son. Grav's voice hardened. And I understand why you created it. Kids from difficult circumstances sometimes invent elaborate stories about absent fathers. It's a coping mechanism. But we can't allow you to present these fabrications as fact. It's disrespectful to our military. It's stolen valor. The words hit David like physical blows. Stolen valor, federal crime, pathological lying. I want to call my mom, David whispered. We've already called her, Mrs. Smith said. She's on her way. David looked down at the torn poster in his lap. His father's face stared up at him in pieces. Sarah Washington walked through the principal's office door like a storm front moving in, controlled, powerful, inevitable. She still wore her scrubs from the hospital, her ID badge swinging from the lanyard around her neck. Behind her came a woman in a charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. David had never been so relieved to see his mother in his life. Mom, I see you, baby, I'm here. Sarah's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed as they swept across the room, landing on the torn poster pieces in David's hands. Something dangerous flickered across her face. Mrs. Washington, Principal Grav stood, his welcoming smile already faltering. Thank you for coming so quickly, we just need to discuss. This is Rebecca Chen, our family attorney. Sarah didn't shake his offered hand. She'll be sitting in on this meeting. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Attorney Chen settled into the chair beside David, opening her briefcase with practiced efficiency. Before we begin, I need to understand the allegations being made against this 8-year-old child. There are no allegations, Mrs. Smith interjected. We're simply concerned about David's tendency to fabricate. You destroyed his school project. Sarah's voice cut like surgical steel. You called my son a liar in front of his entire class. You accused him of a federal crime. Mrs. Washington, surely you understand our position. Grav tried to reclaim control. The claims David made were simply not credible given he glanced at the file, given your family's circumstances. My circumstances? Sarah's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. You mean the fact that I work 60-hour weeks? That I'm raising my son while my husband serves this country? That I qualified for assistance programs because I refused to follow my husband from base to base and sacrifice my own nursing career? Attorney Chen pulled a document from her briefcase. Mr. Grav, I filed a Freedom of Information request with the district. It reveals 14 formal complaints filed against Mrs. Smith in the past 3 years. 14 complaints regarding discriminatory treatment of students of color. All dismissed without investigation. Mrs. Smith's face went pale. 14 families tried to tell you, Sarah continued, her voice shaking now, not with fear but with barely contained fury. 14 children tried to be heard, and you did nothing. Mrs. Washington, I assure you. My husband, Sarah said, each word deliberate and precise, is currently en route from the Pentagon. He had a meeting with the Joint Chiefs this morning, but he cancelled it. He'll be here in, she checked her watch, approximately 3 minutes. Principal Grav's expression shifted from patronizing confidence to something that looked like dawning horror. General Washington takes accusations of stolen valor very seriously, Attorney Chen added quietly. The office fell silent. They could hear footsteps in the hallway outside. Measured, purposeful, getting closer. The door opened. General Robert Washington didn't walk into the room, he commanded it. 6 feet 3 inches of decorated military authority, his dress blues immaculate, 4 silver stars on each shoulder catching the fluorescent light like accusations. His chest bore the weight of 3 decades of service. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Distinguished Service Medal, each ribbon a testament to sacrifice that these people had called a lie. The room froze. Mrs. Smith's mouth opened then closed. No sound came out. Principal Grave half stood from his chair, his knees apparently forgetting how to function. He gripped the edge of his desk like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Dad, David's voice broke the paralysis. He didn't run. His father had taught him dignity even in moments of vindication, but his eyes shone with something fierce and bright. David, the general's voice was deep, measured, the same voice that had briefed presidents and commanded thousands, but when he looked at his son, something softened. Are you all right? Yes, sir. General Washington's gaze moved to the torn poster pieces still clutched in David's hands. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tell that Sarah recognized, one that meant someone had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He turned to face Mrs. Smith. She actually took a step backward. You must be Mrs. Smith. His tone was perfectly courteous, perfectly professional, and absolutely terrifying. I'm General Robert Washington. I believe you've been discussing me. I didn't, her voice came out strangled. I thought. You thought my son was a liar. Not a question, a statement of fact delivered with the precision of a military report. General Washington, there's been a misunderstanding. Principal Grave found his voice, though it trembled at the edges. We were simply trying to verify. Verify what exactly? The general's attention shifted to Grave and the principal visibly wilted. My son told you the truth. He showed you photographic evidence. He offered to contact me directly. What part of that required you to destroy his work and humiliate him in front of his peers? Silence. I asked you a question, Mr. Grave. His circumstances, the free lunch program. Grave was floundering now, his earlier confidence evaporated like morning fog. His circumstances. General Washington repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitterness. You mean the fact that my wife chose financial independence over military housing, that she built her own career instead of following mine, that we taught our son the value of accepting help when it's needed rather than pretending pride can feed a family. Mrs. Smith stared at her shoes, the same shoes that had never been questioned, never been used as evidence of her worth. I believe, the general said quietly, we need to have a much longer conversation. General Washington remained standing, a deliberate choice that made every other adult in the room acutely aware of their own positions. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that had become second nature over 3 decades of service. I grew up in Detroit, he began, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. East Side. My father worked the line at Ford, my mother cleaned houses. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment not unlike the one my son lives in now. Mrs. Smith shifted uncomfortably. I was 12 years old when my 7th grade teacher told me I should consider vocational school instead of college prep classes. He turned from the window, his eyes finding hers. She said boys from my neighborhood didn't have the temperament for higher education. Do you know what she meant by temperament, Mrs. Smith? The teacher said nothing. She meant my skin was the wrong color. She meant my address was the wrong zip code. She meant I had already been measured and found wanting before I'd even been given a chance to prove myself. General Washington, I never said, Mrs. Smith began. You didn't have to say it. His voice remained level, but something volcanic stirred beneath the surface. You said it when you questioned my son's shoes. You said it when you marked down his writing because the vocabulary was inconsistent with your expectations. You said it when you used his free lunch status as evidence of dishonesty. Principal Grave had gone pale. I studied every night under a lamp my mother bought at Goodwill. I worked 2 jobs to help with bills. I got a full scholarship to West Point, which my guidance counselor told me not to bother applying for because those spots go to a certain kind of student. The general's voice hardened. I graduated 3rd in my class. He walked slowly toward Mrs. Smith, stopping a respectful distance away, close enough to make his point, far enough to remain professional. I served in Iraq, twice. I took shrapnel in Fallujah defending this country's ideals that apparently don't extend to 8-year-old boys in your classroom. He gestured to the ribbons on his chest. I earned every commendation you see here. I rose through ranks that told me at every level that I didn't belong. And I did it while people like you questioned whether someone like me could possibly be telling the truth about my own life. Sarah placed a protective hand on David's shoulder. My son came to school proud of his father. The general's voice finally broke, not with weakness, but with a father's fury barely contained. He worked for 2 weeks on that project, and you tore it apart because you couldn't imagine that a black child from Riverside Apartments could possibly be connected to excellence. The silence that followed was suffocating. That ends today, General Washington said. 20 minutes later, General Washington stood at the front of Mrs. Smith's classroom. The teacher herself sat in the back corner, supervised by Attorney Chen and a hastily summoned district administrator. Principal Grave had been asked to leave entirely. 28 third graders sat in absolute silence, their eyes wide. David sat in the front row beside his mother, the torn pieces of his poster carefully gathered in a folder on his lap. My name is General Robert Washington, he began, his voice gentler now but no less commanding. I'm David's father, and I'm here because something happened in this classroom today that I need to talk to you about. No one moved, even Tyler Johnson, who'd laughed the loudest, sat perfectly still. How many of you thought David was lying when he gave his presentation? Slowly, hesitantly, more than half the hands went up. Thank you for your honesty, the general said, and he meant it. Now I want you to think about why you thought he was lying. Was it because his facts were wrong? Heads shook. Was it because he couldn't answer your questions? Maury head shakes. Or was it because someone you trusted, an adult, a teacher, told you not to believe him? The silence grew heavier. I want to teach you 3 words today. See, speak, stand. He wrote them on the whiteboard in firm, clear letters. See means noticing when something isn't right. How many of you saw that Mrs. Smith was treating David differently than she treated other students? Maya Chen's hand rose first, then another, then 5 more. Speak means finding your voice when you witness something unfair. Did anyone speak up for David today? The hands lowered, shame rippled through the room like wind through grass. I'm not asking to make you feel bad, the general continued. I'm asking because I need you to understand something important. Silence isn't neutral. When we see something wrong and say nothing, we become part of the wrong. He walked between the desks, his presence both powerful and somehow safe. Stand means having courage even when it's hard, even when an authority figure is the one being unfair, even when you're scared. He paused at David's desk, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. David stood up for his truth today. He stood alone, but he shouldn't have had to. Tyler Johnson raised his hand, his voice small. I'm sorry, David. Me too, Maya whispered. One by one, the apologies came. Soft, genuine, the sound of children learning a lesson that would stay with them far longer than multiplication tables. General Washington looked at his son and saw something shift in David's expression. Not forgiveness that would take time, but recognition. He'd been heard, finally completely heard. See, speak, stand, the general repeated. Remember those words. 3 weeks later, David walked through hallways that felt different. The whispers had changed, no longer skeptical but curious, respectful, sometimes even admiring. Tyler Johnson had apologized twice more. Maya Chen had invited him to her birthday party. Mrs. Smith's classroom stood empty. She'd been terminated the day after the general's visit, her teaching license under review by the state board. Principal Grave had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into the 14 ignored complaints. The district superintendent had personally apologized to the Washington family, though Sarah had made it clear that apologies without systemic change were just words. But today was about something bigger than consequences. David stood beside his father in the main hallway, watching as a maintenance worker hung a polished wooden plaque above a freshly painted section of wall. The plaque read, Hall of Heroes, where truth stands proud. His poster, carefully restored, each torn piece meticulously taped back together by his mother's patient hands, hung in a new frame behind protective glass. The tears were still visible, thin lines running through his father's image like scars. Sarah had insisted they keep them. The repair is part of the story, she'd said. We don't hide what happened, we show how we rebuilt. Beside David's poster hung another, Maya Chen's grandfather who'd survived Japanese internment camps and later became a federal judge. Next to that, a poster about Tyler Johnson's aunt, a NASA engineer. The wall was filling up, stories that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for permission to be proud. The new principal, Dr. Morrison, stood with them. She was a black woman with silver locks and an education doctorate from Howard. Her first act had been to review every student file flagged for inconsistent performance in the past 3 years. Her second had been to implement mandatory bias training for all staff. David, she said now, her voice warm, would you like to say a few words at the assembly? The entire school would gather in an hour. The local news had been invited. General Washington would speak about service and sacrifice, but Dr. Morrison had insisted that David speak first. What should I say? David asked. His father knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with his son. Tell them what you learned. David looked at his poster, at the visible scars at his father's face pieced back together, at the 4 stars that had seemed impossible to so many people. I learned that the truth doesn't change just because people don't believe it, David said quietly. And I learned that sometimes you have to stand alone before people will stand with you. General Washington smiled, pride shining in his eyes. That's exactly right, son. David reached up and touched the frame, his fingers tracing the golden letters of his father's name. His truth finally whole.